faithfully conveying value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hi, this is Sally talking about books. Today we're introducing the book Mencius, one of the four books of Confucian classics from the pre-Qin era. This book is a collection of sayings and essays, compiling Mencius' discourses totaling over 35,000 words. The central figure in the book, Mencius, his original name was Mencus. He was born about 100 years after Confucius. However, he inherited Confucius's teachings and strived to promote Confucian political ideals to the world. For this purpose, he traveled among various states, advocating his political views to monarchs. During his lifetime, Mencius served as a minister under King Xuan of Qi, making him a high-ranking official in Qi. His political career was much smoother than Confucius's. When he traveled among the states, he had dozens of carriages following him, with hundreds of followers, a much grander entourage than when Confucius traveled. History has positioned Mencius as the second sage of Confucianism, meaning the sage second only to Confucius. Why is Mencius called the second sage? This is because Confucian thought is moral idealism. If Confucius was the founder of the moral utopia, building its framework, then Mencius's achievement was decorating this moral utopia to make it more magnificent. So, what did Mencius actually do? This requires delving into the book Mencius. The book Mencius consists of 7 chapters, primarily recording Mencius's dialogues with various people. Among these are monarchs from the Warring States period who asked Mencius about governance, and disciples from other schools who debated with Mencius on basic political views. Of course, there were also Mencius's own disciples inquiring about learning. The debates in the book are very sharp and logically rigorous. Moreover, Mencius often used fables, like trying to catch fish by climbing a tree, and 50 steps mocking 100 steps. Stories that come from Mencius. The ideas reflected in these dialogues can be summarized with 3 keywords. First, inherent goodness. Second, benevolent governance. Third, order and chaos. Let's first look at the first keyword, inherent goodness. Simply put, it means human nature is inherently good. The theory of inherent goodness is the foundation of all Mencius's thought. In fact, Mencius's entire philosophy is directly derived from this psychological premise of inherent goodness. But what is goodness? Goodness is a somewhat broad and abstract concept. Mencius said, what is desirable is called good. What is unanimously approved by the heart is good. Put together, it means if there is a value worth pursuing, everyone would want to pursue it. That kind of value is goodness. Where does this goodness come from? Mencius believed that goodness comes from human nature. He has a famous 4 sprouts theory saying, compassion is the sprout of benevolence, shame is the sprout of righteousness, modesty is the sprout of propriety. The sense of right and wrong is the sprout of wisdom. In other words, people have compassion, shame, generosity in helping others, and an instinct to distinguish right from wrong. These are the sources of benevolence, righteousness, propriety, and wisdom. Since human nature itself contains these 4 sources of goodness, everyone can become a Yao or Shun. That is to say, everyone has the potential to become a sage. It can be said that Mencius advocated equality before morality. Everyone starts from the same point in this regard. Since Mencius said goodness is human essence, why have there always been people doing evil deeds worse than pigs or dogs? Mencius explained that human nature is inclined towards goodness, but external environments can corrupt people, leading to evil. To turn from inclination to actual goodness, relying on instinct isn't enough. You need sufficient awareness of goodness to actively control your behavior. To give an analogy, like a child who does a good deed but may not even realize it, when he grows up and becomes an adult, Doing good deeds must come from clear judgment. To achieve this, Mencius advocated efforts from two aspects. First, purifying the external social atmosphere, which can reduce the space for evil in society. However, it depends on the enlightenment of the precognizant individuals. Mencius believed that such people can see deeper into the world and are always half a step ahead of others. Mencius positioned himself as a precognizant individual. People like him have the responsibility to enlighten the world. However, precognizant individuals are few, and changing social atmosphere is no easy task. Therefore, a more important and universal method is for everyone to continuously improve their cultivation to resist external erosion. There are three ways to improve cultivation: nurturing the heart, nurturing nature, and nurturing ki. Let's talk about nurturing the heart first. Mencius believed that the best way to nurture the heart is to reduce desires. With fewer desires, energy is freed up, allowing time to reflect on one's nature. This is nurturing nature. Mencius said, "He who exhausts his heart knows his nature." Nurturing one's nature is how one serves heaven. This is the key point of nurturing nature. In today's terms, it means to spend effort contemplating one's innate nature. With this awareness, one can control their behavior and actively do good. Then the next step is nurturing ki. Mencius said, "I am good at cultivating my vast flowing ki." The process of cultivating ki is about condensing rationality into will. To use an imperfect analogy, it's about turning what you think is right and good after reflection into your belief to support your actions. Vast flowing qui. It can be simply understood as the spirit of being upright and unwavering, thinking, "Who else but me?" At this point, the three aspects of cultivation are covered. As long as you persist in nurturing heart, nature, and ki, you can become an upright and indomitable great man. The great man is an ideal personality proposed by Mencius. So what does this ideal personality look like? Mencius gave a famous definition: rich and honored, not corrupted; poor and lowly, not moved; powerful and forceful, not subdued. This is called a great man. A great man must have great responsibility. He must be able to strengthen his will and expand his abilities in adversity, enabling him to achieve what he couldn't before. In extreme cases, he can even sacrifice life for righteousness. This great responsibility isn't a choice. After weighing pros and cons, it actively arises from one's own humanity and is very infectious. Since the source of the great man's actions comes from himself, when facing established order, he inevitably has a dismissive attitude. On this point, the difference between Confucius and Mencius is particularly significant. In Confucius's view, a gentleman must behave respectfully before superiors and in the face of aristocratic hierarchy. But with Mencius, he directly said, "Look down upon the great men, don't be intimidated by their imposing stature." That is to say, when facing people of high status, don't be intimidated by their position. So when he spoke to King Hui of Liang and King Xuan of Qi, he was not polite at all. He kept questioning these lords until they had to avoid his sharpness. Looking left and right, speaking of other things. In short, Confucius strictly adhered to the hierarchical Zhou rituals, so the gentleman essentially has a submissive personality. Submissive to what? Submissive to rituals. Confucius hoped to do as one's heart desires without overstepping boundaries. This boundary that won't be overstepped is ritual. But Mencius lived in the Warring States period when rituals were completely collapsed. He had no intention to restore Zhou rituals. He emphasized more an independent personality like that of a great man. All right, at this point, Mencius's theory of inherent goodness is introduced. Generally speaking, Mencius believed that goodness is human nature, but it requires cultivation and practice to know and do good. The ultimate goal of this cultivation is to become a great man with an independent personality. And what is a great man? It means your principles come from within, not swayed by external rules. Next, let's look at the second key concept in Mencius, benevolent governance. What is benevolent governance? Starting from human psychology, Mencius first proposed the concept of the heart that cannot bear to see others suffer. This heart that cannot bear is essentially compassion. It's innate and a form of empathy. The root of benevolent governance lies in everyone possessing this. Uh, the heart that cannot bear to see others suffer. Therefore, statesmen will have compassion for the people, respecting others' elders as their own, and caring for others' children as their own. That is, treating the elders of common people like your own parents and their children like your own. That, when statesmen act this way, they're spreading benevolence and implementing benevolent governance. The core tenet of benevolent governance is the people are paramount. Mencius famously said, "The people are most important. The state comes next. The ruler is least important." Mencius applied this people first principle to all aspects of benevolent governance. Economically, people first means prioritizing the people's prosperity. Mencius said, "Those with constant property have constant hearts. Without property, they lack constancy. Without constancy, they'll commit all manner of excesses." This means only when people have property and stable lives can they develop morality and order. Otherwise, struggling for survival, they'll do anything. Therefore, Mencius believed wise rulers must ensure people can support parents, raise children, be secure in good years, and survive bad years. In other words, families should support elders, marry and have children, avoid hunger in peaceful times, and survive disasters. Only then will people follow rulers. So, how to make people prosperous? And Mencius proposed two main measures. First, prioritizing people's livelihood, including restoring the well-field system. The well-field system was an ideal institution in Confucian thought. Mencius envisioned this system working perfectly. With 5 acres for mulberry trees, 50-year-olds have clothing, properly timed breeding of poultry and livestock. Then 70-year-olds have meat, with 100-acre fields timely cultivated, families avoid hunger. This meant distributing land to ensure production and basic sustenance. Second, lighten labor duties and taxes while emphasizing fair distribution, inheriting Confucius's thought. Worry not about scarcity, but about inequality. The word equitable here doesn't mean equality as understood today, but balanced distribution. Zhu Xi, from the Song dynasty, interpreted equitable, closest to Mencius, believing it means everyone gets their due share. Why? Because all Confucians advocate hierarchy, and under hierarchy, economic distribution can't be equal, only balanced. Therefore, Mencius advocated light corvée duties and low taxes, meaning tax burdens shouldn't be too high, but also not too low or non-existent. Politically, people paramount means valuing public opinion. Mencius believed that the people's support determines the rise and fall of regimes. Mencius said, "Ji and Zhu lost the world because they lost the people. Losing the people means losing their hearts. Ancient tyrants lost their kingdoms because they lost the people's hearts." Thus, Mencius repeatedly advised lords to judge based on public opinion. Once, King Swan of Qi asked Mencius, "How do we judge if someone is a worthy talent?" Mencius replied, "If the king's close ministers say he's good, it's not reliable. Even if all ministers praise him, it's insufficient. Only when all common people say he's good. And after investigation, it's confirmed, then he can be promoted." Militarily, Mencius opposed military slaughter, advocating not delighting in killing. The reasoning is simple. If war rages daily, people suffer, life becomes cheap, then it's not people paramount, but people worthless. At this point, you'll see Mencius's benevolent governance is essentially people-centered thought, a remarkable creation by Mencius. Before Mencius, ruling legitimacy came from heaven. Mencius replaced divine will with public opinion. This is, heaven sees as the people see. Heaven hears as the people hear, meaning divine will is public opinion itself, becoming the new source of ruling legitimacy. Mencius elevated this people-centered thought to a great height. He even believed the government has an absolute obligation to nourish the people and secure the state, but the people have no absolute duty to obey the government. As long as the government fails, the people need not obey it. Having covered benevolent governance, next we discuss Mencius's view of history, my third keyword, order and chaos. To deeply understand Mencius, we must compare Confucius and Mencius's differing attitudes toward history. First, Confucius's ideal was restoring the order of the Zhou dynasty's golden age. He avoided stating directly that King Wu of Zhao took the realm by force, but Mencius urgently sought unification under one ruler. Hui of Liang asked how the world could be pacified. Mencius said it must be unified under one ruler. Mencius frequently mentioned Tang and Wu, praising King Wu of Zhao, who in his anger brought peace to the people. Moreover, Mencius placed his hopes not on the Zhou royal house, but on a new king. This new king would inevitably emerge from among the feudal lords at that time. Therefore, during his travels among states, Mencius constantly urged lords with kingly governance. He told King Hui of Liang, 100 li domain can produce a true king. The benevolent are invincible. And to King Swan of Qi, protect the people to become king, and none can oppose you. He hoped Wei and Qi would follow King Wu's example. In anger, bring peace to the people, meaning rising to stabilize the realm. Why were Confucius and Mencius so different on this point? Simply because their eras were completely different. In Confucius's time, though Zhou rituals were rigid, the world wasn't yet chaotic, so he held hope for restoring rights through self-discipline. In Mencius's era, Qin employed Shangyang, Chu and Wei employed Wuqi. Reforms greatly strengthened states, and major powers had mostly annexed smaller ones. The land within the seas has 9,000 li squares. The world became competition among major powers. Zhou's decline was inevitable, forcing Mencius to seek new paths. For this, Mencius developed new arguments for a new king's rise. He said, the world has existed long. The order alternates with chaos. Mencius believed dynastic changes followed heaven's will, manifesting as alternation between order and chaos. Thus, every 5 centuries, a true king arises. From Yao and Shun to Tang was 500 years. Tang to King Wen, another 500. This is the famous dynastic cycle theory. Since regime changes come from heaven's mandate, overthrowing old orders isn't treason, but the righteous punishing the unrighteous, natural and undisguised. Once, King Xuan of Qi asked Mencius about Tang exiling Ji and Wu overthrowing Zhou. Mencius replied bluntly, tyrants like Ji and Zhou are outcasts. Exiling or killing them isn't regicide. Note, Mencius used the dynastic cycle to justify revolution's legitimacy. But since this cycle comes from heaven, tyrants await heaven's punishment. When heaven's mandate isn't due, people have no right to revolt. Mencius's view of order-chaos, this dynastic cycle theory, profoundly influenced Chinese thought. In fact, China's historical narrative never escaped this dynastic cycle. Subjects also consider the rise and fall of dynasties quite normal. So, as stated at the beginning of Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the general trend under heaven is that long division must unite and long union must divide. All right, so at this point, the 3 key concepts, inherent goodness, benevolent governance, and order chaos, are covered. Mencius's thoughts are pretty much explained. Next, let's look at Mencius's influence. First, Mencius was a spiritual mentor to ancient Chinese. The German philosopher Karl Jaspers once proposed a very famous concept, the axial age. He believed that between 800 BC and 200 BC, was the axial age of human civilization. This period was a major breakthrough in human spirit. During this time, great spiritual mentors emerged in various civilizations. For example, Greece had Plato, China had Confucius, and India had Buddha. The principles they proposed shaped different cultural traditions and have continued to influence human life. Mencius, whom we discussed today, was also such a spiritual mentor. However, his journey to becoming one was somewhat winding. After flourishing in the Warring States period, his doctrines quickly fell into obscurity. During the Qin and Han dynasties, Mencius's status wasn't high. The Confucian classics were the five classics: Book of Songs, Book of Documents, Book of Rites, I Ching, and Spring and Autumn Annals. At that time, Confucians focused on ritual system construction, so they valued ancient knowledge and documents highly. It wasn't until the Tang dynasty that Han Yu proposed the orthodox transmission theory, claiming that the orthodox lineage of Confucianism had only four figures: Confucius, Zhenzi, Zisi, and Mencius. Confucius passed his teachings to his grandson Zisi, and then through Zisi to Mencius. After Mencius's death, this orthodox lineage was lost, and Mencius's status thus rose. By the Song and Ming dynasties, Neo-Confucian scholars came to the intellectual stage, such as the Cheng brothers, Cheng Hao and Cheng Yi of the Northern Song, and Zhu Shi of the Southern Song. They all drew nourishment from Mencius to create new doctrines. Thus, many fundamental concepts in Song-Ming Confucianism, like Qi and heaven, can trace their origins to Mencius. During the Southern Song dynasty, Zhu Shi selected the four books of Confucianism, which include Mencius. It is the longest and most substantial volume among them. Up until the late Qing dynasty, the four books were mandatory content for the imperial examinations, making Mencius an essential read for Chinese people. Thus, we can see the importance of Mencius in the history of Chinese thought. Of course, the influence of Mencius's thought on later generations is not only manifested academically, but also in shaping the spiritual world of Chinese people. Mencius represents the spirit of protest within pre-Qin Confucianism, forever inspiring Chinese intellectuals to bravely pursue truth. In this sense, Mencius can truly be called great. However, Mencius's thoughts originate from over 2 millennia ago. While acknowledging his nourishment of Chinese culture, we must be careful not to conflate his ideas with similar modern concepts. The most typical example is his people-centered thought, often confused with modern democratic ideals. Modern democracy advocates equality before law and political self-rule, while people-centered thought remains capped by monarchy, a hierarchy where rulers govern for the people, with no possibility of universal equality. Mencius also designed this hierarchy by linking ranks to professions, dividing people into scholars, farmers, artisans, and merchants. As a ruling class member, he believed farmers, artisans, and merchants had the duty to support them. As per the saying, those who labor with minds govern, those who labor with strength are governed. This is universal principle. Why have people long linked people-centered thought with modern democracy? Because Mencius's ideal personality, the great man, empowered scholar officials to historically limit monarchic power from moral high ground, making later autocrats despise him. Zhu Yuanzhang, the Ming dynasty's founding emperor, removed Mencius's memorial tablet from the Confucian temple. During the Ming era, the book Mencius could only be published in abridged editions. By the late Qing dynasty, the autocratic system began disintegrating. People revisited historical intellectual resources opposing autocracy. Mencius's people-centered thought was thus reinterpreted and compared to modern democracy, a misreading that paradoxically kept him relevant in modern discourse. All right, that concludes our interpretation of the book Mencius. Reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.